Hi guys, in today's discussion of Sitaram Goel's book, How I Became a Hindu, we will discuss a section where Sitaram Goel takes Ram Swarup, his friend philosopher guide and his college senior, to meet his Marwari communist boss in Kolkata in sometime in late 40s, around 1949. And Ram Swarup displays his great knowledge of free market economics and how capitalism works, which was pretty uncommon for those days when in India almost everyone was a communist or a socialist at least. So Ram Swarup exposes a logical fallacy presented by Sitaram Goel's boss. You can find some examples of an entire book full of examples of these sorts in my favorite economist Thomas Sowell's book Economic Facts and Fallacies, where you will learn how even facts can be manipulated and displayed and presented to an audience in a very false and untrue manner. For example, let's say a musician and a poet get into a fight, and maybe they were two friends, or maybe they were enemies. They always had an enmity since their childhood days, and then they get into a fight and the musician wins, and the news reports say that musician beats up poet, not that person A beat up person B. So, and then it becomes that musicians are an oppressive population against poets. So this meeting between Ram Swarup and Sitaram Goel's boss happens after Sitaram Goel has already taken Ram Swarup to meet a communist friend of his, and that meeting did not go all that well, where Ram Swarup only listened to Sitaram Goel's friend and didn't utter much words, but Ram Swarup was disappointed with his communist friend. Ram Swarup commented, well, his commitment to communism is a pathological condition. It needs to be unraveled. And then Sitaram Goel makes Ram Swarup meet his boss. Finally, I arranged a meeting between Ram Swarup and my boss. Both of them exchanged pleasantries and avoided the one subject which I wanted them to discuss. The discussion took place a few days later, as my boss was passing by my seat and found Ram Swarup sitting in front of me. It was about the next big world depression and disintegration of the world capitalist system, suspected by us communists to be round the corner at that time. Now, Sitaram Goel still addresses himself as a communist because he was up until that time. But what's more interesting is that what they were predicting in 1949 is still going around to this day. Communists and socialists forever think that the capitalist system is about to end any day and communist revolutions will happen all around the world, but that day never comes. There could be no disagreement because Ram Swarup was convinced that There could be no agreement because Ram Swarup was convinced that another depression would not be permitted by the capitalists who had acquired a fairly good grasp of their economies. Now, this part obviously Ram Swarup got wrong because many times depressions happened even after them. But maybe capitalists did get their economies in their grasp, and maybe depressions are just the natural way of things. It falls and goes up, but overall an improvement happens like everything else in your life. Maybe it's weight loss or weight gain. Day-to-day weight variations don't mean anything. Maybe you are working out and following a strict diet, but your weight might be 1 kg more today than it was yesterday, even though you are burning off your calories, because there's something called water weight. So how weight loss happens is it goes up and goes down and goes up and goes down, but the overall graph is always downward if you are on a weight loss path. Same is the case for anything you learn new. You learn something new. Maybe you suck at that thing tomorrow again, and maybe you don't suck at that day after tomorrow. Maybe you suck again on the 4th day, but overall an improvement happens. That is how markets work. So anyone who thinks that depressions are never going to happen again obviously doesn't know history or much of finance or economics. My boss gave figures of firms that had gone bankrupt within that year. Ram Swarup requested him to find out for himself and for us also figures of new firms that must have come up during the same specific period. This is my favorite part. This is the exact fallacy I'm talking about. Ram Swarup's boss argues that capitalist systems are falling apart. Based on what? Based on the fact that he brings out some random figures where he says firms are disintegrating and firms are going bankrupt. But what Ram Swarup stealthily and slyly and cleverly points out that in the same period, new firms have also come up, maybe by the same people, I'm 90% sure, 99% sure that by the same people, because the people who go bankrupt don't suddenly, all of them don't commit suicide or don't get a government job, or any job for that matter. They keep trying, and they bring up a new business, maybe on some other product, or maybe in the same product, but with a different team and a different name and a different leadership. And what's most important is what Ram Swarup says next. His argument was that in a living economy, some firms must be falling sick and going out, and that it did not matter if the reverse trend was also there. This is a beautiful point presented by Ram Swarup. This is exactly what governments should remember and should allow companies to fail. Because if you don't let a company fail, that same person, that founder or the CEO cannot come up with a new company, and what happens is the workers, the laborers, keep waiting for the company to get back on its feet. They can't, because they are creating a halla, they are creating strikes, and they are forcing the government to make this guy run this failed company, as has happened in Bengal, which is why we have Ganges banks filled with failed companies and failed factories, because the government didn't let them fail and start a new company. And up until hardly last 5-6 years, that was the case, where it was almost impossible for a person to close down his company. Before 1991, what used to happen was it was impossible to start a new business, and that stopped after 1991 liberalization. But up until the last few years, it was almost impossible to close down a business. But as Ram Swarup points out, any firms, any banks, they should be allowed to fail. Not banks specifically. Banks are a different conversation. For some reason, I'm mentioning banks, but I mean private entities and private companies and private firms should be allowed to fail, and so that they can think of the jute mills that maybe you've heard about forever if you are from Kolkata and Bengal. Jute mills after jute mills close down, and typewriter companies fail because no one uses those things as much as before. But the companies never close down fully, and those laborers keep waiting for that company to get on its feet and spend their lives protesting and on a measly, some kind of a pension or something. But they could have gotten better jobs in a company started by the same person, or maybe some other company also failed, and that guy created a company where these guys could have done a job. But that was not allowed to happen by our governments. It restored a new perspective to the whole argument. My boss offered no more comments that day. I asked Ram Swarup's opinion about my boss. He said, "He's much better. He argues with a lot of facts and figures, and not with party slogans."